You weren't way down yonder on the Chattahoochee, where it gets hotter than a hoochie coochie, were you, Abe? Cast Iron Brains, a podcast that knows that when William Butler Yeats wrote the poem The Second Coming, in an attempt to capture the feelings of things in Europe at the conclusion of the Great War and amidst the Great Influenza, neither of which were precisely great in the way we might usually use the word, but were certainly events of enormous scale, which is presumably how they meant it then. And really, there's little confusion even now, of course, but you can never be too careful. Anyway, when Yeats wrote his poem about Europe after the war to end all wars and during the devastating Spanish flu, though again, that wasn't really the war to end all wars, was it, given the rise of the Third Reich and that whole global conflict that followed? Not to mention Korea and Vietnam and all the Middle East wars and the various African wars nobody pays much attention to. And of course, Spanish flu is just an unfair branding of a pandemic that most people think spread through Europe only because a bunch of American GIs brought it with them when they went over to fight in the war to end war for a couple of decades. Anyway, but here we are, distracted again. Let's try once more. All right, so Yeats, he wrote this poem about, the feeling in the air of a particular time and place as a result of events. And it's clear that whatever he was talking about, he can't possibly have been talking about now, about today, because that was over 100 years ago, and he was a dummy poet who lived before humans really knew much of anything, not like now, when we have the internet, can know literally anything whenever we want. Or maybe it's anything we want to be can be what we know. I'm not sure. I'm just certain it's better now, though. What Yeats wrote, things fall apart. The center cannot hold, seems to this podcast to actually have something to offer this particular moment. That the middle seems untenable when the ends have gone berserk, that mounting a defense of not being sure in a time of absolute moral clarity can look like apathy or resignation or simply disengagement when it's anything but that, as Yeats puts it, at a time when the best lack all conviction while the worst are full of passionate intensity, it can make even the act of taking a moment and just thinking about things seem, to the fully convicted, worthy of derision and condemnation. And whatever rough beast slouches towards us to be born again, it won't be born out of whatever revealed truths our modern priests of the apocalypse insist rule us today. No, that rough beast is born out of the gaping chasm left in the middle, after the center has been torn asunder by truths that were only such in the minds of a few passionate idiots. Because things fall apart, and the center cannot hold. My name is Bob, sitting across the way from my good friend and co-host. That's Abe. How you doing tonight, Abe?
Doing well, Bob.
Yeah, here we are. Lori's here too. How you doing, Lori?
I'm fine.
Lori's fine. Tonight is Monday, February the 20th, 2023. A little bit later than we usually start tonight, due to some technical difficulties. I'm sure this late start will chasten me into keeping things focused and on track and wrapped up nice and early tonight, right? That's how this usually goes.
I'm sure that you should have checked to see if everything was working all day today earlier.
Can I take the over on chasing?
I think you can.
Okay.
If you can bet on XFL games, which I found out this weekend, if you wanted to, you certainly can.
The XFL has
then
started?
Yes, you can take.
Yeah, we watched a little.
No.
The kickoff's good.
It's like some
That's
weird
true.
gimmick, right? They're all lined up
It's
like
better.
5
No,
yards.
it's not a gimmick. It's just an improvement.
It's
So
better.
what they do is they have the kicker back wherever the fuck the kicker
Right.
goes. I don't know.
35
and they
yard
have
line?
the person who's receiving the ball be in a normal position to receive the ball. But they start the lines of scrimmage, essentially, the what would usually you'd be calling like the runners and the
Right.
blockers, right? In a traditional NFL kickoff, they start them only 5 yards apart,
Right.
way down in the receiving team's territory at like the 25 and the 30 or something like that, let's say. And so they, instead of getting a running start and letting these assholes get up to like 22 miles an hour or whatever they get up to, and then slamming into each other and causing great chaos and injury and loss of life and limb, they just run into each other from 5 yards apart. So there's much less chance
Right.
of injury. And the other bright side is that there's way fewer touchbacks, like something like in excess of 90% of the kickoffs in the XFL are returned, which is a more exciting play. But they don't want that in the NFL because it increases the risk of injury. But they've eliminated that with their clever rule. It's a much better system.
So the line, I watched a clip of this gimmick, and I'm all for gimmicks.
Not a gimmick.
So the first thing you'll notice is that, it's a weird configuration because, like, the two lines are like further towards the ball, where the ball's going to end up, than in the middle. And second of all, basically, it precludes any sort of onside kick, right? I mean, how could you possibly do an onside kick in that case? Not that those things are successful all that much. So you can throw that away. It's not like a big thing you're going to lose, right, with this new system. And the way that I understand it is that the lines of scrimmage cannot engage until either the person catches the ball, or I guess after 3 seconds go by, or something like that.
Right, so that's where it gets a little gimmicky, is it?
The whole
if
thing
the
is
ball
gimmicky.
if the ball is not touched and is just laying on the turf for 3 seconds, so I guess somebody's counting somewhere.
Is there a
where there's like a
Mississippi
big
count?
clock?
Like-
it goes, like it counts down 3, 2, 1, and then a light goes off and everybody can run or something. Or like the referee just yells "Ollie Ollie oxen free" or something stupid like that.
But
Not sure exactly.
the ups-
Okay. I will acknowledge it has a gimmicky aspect, but in general, just a good evolution.
the upside is that, the safety consideration, and also there's actual action, like it's not like the ball ends in a touch, there's actually some attempt to move the ball. So
A play worth watching.
do you think that they'll ever implement that? I mean, a lot of the goofy gimmicks, like from basketball and football, like the 2-point attempt was like an AFL scheme, right? That they incorporated into the NFL, like the 3-point line was some sort of ABA thing. Like these different ideas come from like lower level leagues or competing leagues. Do you think that in a few years there will be this kickoff rule implemented in the NFL?
A few years ago, I would have said absolutely not. And then baseball expanded the size of first and third base, and then also gives you a special ghost runner on second base at the start of extra innings for no reason. So apparently fucking anything can fly in America's pastime. So yeah, I mean, fuck it. Do whatever you want. It's not. It doesn't fundamentally change the game. I do think that people would freak out about the inability of the kicking team to even attempt an onside kick, or how they would incorporate the ability of the kicking team to somehow maintain possession, barring just a muffing of the kick by the other team. I'm not sure.
Isn't there a separate gimmick to address just that, which is, I think this only is allowed in the fourth quarter or at the end of each half, but like a team, instead of an onside kick, could choose to go 4th and 15 from deep in their own, like on the 25. On their own 25, they can choose to try to convert a 4th and 15, and that will be their onside kick recovery. If you fail to recover, or if you fail to convert the 4th and 15, then the other team gets the ball right there, like in your own.
I did not know that because I didn't watch more than 45 seconds of the XFL this weekend, but that is fucking spectacular.
But it would favor imagine playing the Chiefs and you're like, ahead on them, and they're just like, oh, sure, give it to Mahomes. What's 15 yards to him? He'll just chuck it up to that fucking Kelsey guy who's always open. And you'll never be able to put a team away. Like, I think that will not ever be upgraded to the NFL. Yeah. But the kickoff is fine.
All right. Well, apparently we're not ready to leave football behind, I think, is the moral of the opening story here tonight.
I think once the ratings come in, I think it'll be very clear that people are indeed very much willing to leave football behind for the next 7 months.
But this podcast.
No, this podcast is unwilling to just move along here. Talk about something besides sports in the opening segment.
No.
Hey, you had President's Day off, correct?
That's right.
Big Big vacation day. You know, I got a couple of texts from listeners of the show. Shortly after you texted me on Saturday afternoon, you sent the New York Times notification that President Jimmy Carter, former President Carter, was retiring to plains to live out his remaining days without medical intervention. They call that home hospice care, which just means that he won't be receiving any further medical interventions or
to
treatment
extend
for
his life,
various
but he
maladies.
will take drugs for palliative care, right? I mean, he's gonna be drugged up.
Sure, but they're not going to try to keep him alive
Right.
any longer than his body wants to keep doing that work for itself. So presumably, we're in the final days of President Carter's life. I won't say which particular GIF accompanied your text message to us about the president.
I wouldn't read too much into that. That's a joke, Bob. Come on.
Right. Yeah. But I will say that I got multiple text messages from listeners also alerting me to the fact that Jimmy Carter is going to be dying soon, and talking about how I'll bet Abe is very excited about this development. So that's
how people know you.
That's your legacy, Abe, out there in the world. Just so you know.
Oh yeah, Abe, that guy who was waiting for Jimmy Carter to die.
So, you know, it really goes to show you when you make these predictions, you know, the unintended consequences. You know, I started last year with saying there's no way these two very old public figures, the Queen and the former president from my home state of Georgia, they're not going to get to 23, right? 22 is it. That's the end of the road for both of them. And for one of them, it was. And for some reason, it just I took great offense to the fact that just he would still be alive. Like, you know, he survived 2022. But I'm not, in fact, actually rooting for anybody to die. Come on.
Let's see what to do first here. I guess we'll do, let's talk about Roald Dahl books and the changes that have been made.
Bob spent all day working on a child's project for a 4th grade science project, so today should be real fun.
I wouldn't say that I spent all day doing my son's homework for him. I was just there to help.
Certainly appears that way when you look at the writing of the homework. It sounds an awful lot like the intro to this show.
Oh, yeah? Is that what it sounds like? Calvin, all right, so here's the assignment is for the boy has to, he could choose from a number of different options. The option that he chose that he wanted to do was to keep an astronaut's journal as this particular astronaut visits all of the planets in our solar system. And I simply helped direct that to some extent. I did not write any of the sentences. I improved a couple of sentences. Believe me, this could have been far better. I don't want to dump on the boy's hard work. He did a very good job. But it is a mere shadow of the thing that I had imagined for him when we were talking about it.
He's 10 years old.
Yeah, definitely. Also, the fact that this is the first, what feels like the first real homework assignment he's had in years, makes me nervous about like what's to come. Because like he's like, it's good that you learn to do work at this age, but it concerns me that like this is really the first big one that he's had to like sort of conceive of on his own and also put together. And like, I don't know, it feels like we'd done more of that by the time I was 10 years old.
Different approach.
Discriminatory because here we are.
Anyway, Abe, you sent along a link to a story. I think it was in The Independent or something like that. I tried to read it, and it demanded a subscription. So I don't know. Do you subscribe to that goddamn website?
Okay, this is interesting. Does it matter when you click on a story? Because sometimes if you like one of these aggregating websites, I think it does. Drudge Report or some other website that just has links to things, there's some sort of weird thing where it's like, well, you clicked on it, so it's fine now. But if I came back to it today, I would get some sort of like a flash page about like
maybe
subscribing.
It's like they give you one a month.
Yeah, maybe
it doesn't matter which one.
I think it's the Telegraph, and what it was they leave it to be read for like a day, and then they paywall it shortly thereafter.
Okay.
Sometimes I think that they will, like the Wall Street Journal, for example. I don't know that they even have a definitive stance. I think it's like, hey, if this thing is doing numbers, we're not going to paywall it because it's like this was an exclusive, and we just want to get the story out there with our name on it, and that will generate more subscribers.
Right.
Anyway, the point here is that I can't read the goddamn article that you sent along to me, but there have been plenty of other things to read about this, including, and there will be links to that in the show notes if you need them. The Times also, of course, and every other outlet has stories about Roald Dahl's books, and the Times headline is Roald Dahl's books are rewritten to cut potentially offensive language. New editions of the best-selling author's children's classics, including Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, have been altered to eliminate words deemed inappropriate. A backlash ensued. By means of example of what has been changed, this is from that Telegraph article that I don't have access to, but you helpfully screenshotted a couple of things. The text would read, "The man behind the counter looked fat and well-fed. He had big lips and fat cheeks and a very fat neck." And that's just been excised entirely. That's no longer in the text. The fat shopkeeper shouted has been changed to the shopkeeper shouted. So we're getting a lot of removals of descriptions of fat things. Get all that mud off your pants has been changed to get all that mud off your trousers, which that doesn't seem terribly offensive to me. Although David Letterman's production company, Worldwide Pants, which always gets a chuckle out of me for some reason, which I guess is the point of why...
Pants is a very funny word.
It's a very funny word, and also pairing it with Worldwide Pants is obviously inherently hilarious for reasons that my 11 or 12-year-old brain knew, and my 40-year-old brain still finds funny. Anyway, policemen with arms linked were trying to hold them back from the gates has been changed to police officers with arms linked. We're trying to do that. All the children except Charlie had both their mothers and fathers with them. All the children except Charlie had their parents with them. So any reference to a mother or a father has been removed in favor of the sort of non-denominational parent.
Right.
And there's a lot of other examples that I don't have to go through all of them. Certainly. Abe, is this a big deal? Does this matter? Is the seething and impotent rage with which I was struck upon reading this article justified?
You know, it's funny. When I was sending this link to you, I was wondering if you were seated, if you were somewhere in public. I didn't want you to blow a gasket because I knew this was gonna rub you the wrong way. Especially, I got a laugh out of it. But what's weird is there are so many of these changes. You went over just a few examples, but there are so many instances where they would outright remove, just a sentence or a word, or they would reword it and make it worse. And the further along you read in the article, when I had the opportunity to do so, they were talking about the company Puffin, the publishers, and Netflix. Apparently they bought the rights to this author's works. They got partnered up with some goofy named company called Inclusive Minds. And these are the people that go in and they make these recommendations, instead of whatever fat, get rid of the fat, or get rid of the individuated parents.
So to be clear, because I didn't set this up very well because I was distracted, this is not something that's been done by some woke activist group or something that's coming in and complaining about these works that actually belong to someone else. So this is not public domain stuff. Roald Dahl only died in 1990. So his estate still has full control of his collected works, of everything that he ever wrote. And it is his estate who has decided to make these changes of their own volition, apparently seeing the writing on the wall.
Right. They're basically anticipating future problems. And that's kind of what is upsetting on when I was reading it. It's basically they want the IP, the intellectual property of the name, the brand. This person is a known children's author. They want to use that, and then they want to just get rid of all of the potential problems to future profits, right? I mean, this is just a transparently cynical approach, right? This is not we're making art better or we're doing anything other than just remove any sort of problem that we may face in the future, so that way these books are still being sold and we're still making money.
Right. And to be clear, the problems that we're talking about are, in fact, problems that would be identified by crazy woke activist types. I don't mean to say that they have nothing to do with this. I mean to say that the Roald Dahl estate specifically hired some fucking lunatics to come in and find all of the problematic language here and remove it. Wherein problematic language is just the description of characters and their physical characteristics, just their fatness being completely unacceptable for some reason. So, by the way, when Netflix goes to adapt these various works and they're trying to create these characters, what text are they going to be drawing from when they're doing this? Because if the shopkeeper is no longer fat, if that's no longer a feature of the character as written in Dahl, are they going to, will it be a fat shopkeeper still?
Right.
Or will it be a not fat shopkeeper because the source text that they're using didn't have that in the description? And does it matter? No, I guess in some fundamental way, it's an adaptation anyway, so it doesn't fucking matter.
Right.
But to me, if we're talking about the intent of the artist and the fact that like words matter, and the activist psychopaths are also intent that words matter, right? They believe that the words have a great deal of import here, so much so that they're going to neuter the fuck out of the language and take anything out that they can claim. There's no proof, by the way, that this actually harms anyone.
Right.
It's just. And to be clear, it never harmed anyone for the shopkeeper to be described as fat. I can't even begin to imagine what possible harm is there, especially given that the fat acceptance movement recognizes fat as an apt descriptor for a person's physical stature. That the current woke ideology says it should be fine to use fat as the word rather than getting all euphemistic and stupid about things. They've reclaimed fat because fat is what it is.
Right. Online, obviously there's all these hot takes and people are making their complaints. And there's been a lot of charges of like plagiarism, which doesn't really make sense, right? This is not plagiarism. But there is a word that I always read, but I can't say out loud. But it's like, I want to say it's boulderize, but it's like where you take some original material and you change things because of its offensive nature or whatever. So like, this is more that, and I don't know if there's a crime against that, right? There's no like rule against changing the stuff. Like there's not like if you make so many X number of changes in a book, in an original work, you have to like on the cover make mention of it, or like this is a reimagining of the works. Like there's no like requirement that you say that this is a different product than the original version. Right. And so passing it off as the original works is where the problem is. Like when you're making this, there were a lot of examples, and it wasn't just one book. It was just all of the books. It seemed like they're making random changes. The motivations behind some of them don't make any sense. It's just like personal preference for the people at Inclusive Minds. I don't know. There was no like logic behind some of the changes.
Is this even more cynical than we're giving it credit for? Is this just a way to, over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, sell a bunch? Because they're going to sell Roald Dahl books no matter what. Right. They sell them to schools. They're going to school libraries will feel that in order to do the right thing, they need to replace all of the old Roald Dahl books with new, updated, inclusive Roald Dahl books. And then in 2030, at some important milestone, they'll be like, okay, the estate of Roald Dahl has decided that we need to re-release the originals as originally intended by the great master himself, Roald Dahl, and now you can get the words as written by Roald Dahl, and there'll be special editions, and they'll roll that out in spectacular fashion.
Rolled that out.
Is that what we're looking at here? Is this just an opportunity for multiple versions to be the way that the fucking Star Wars comes out with a new special edition every goddamn 5 years, and you just don't have the right one anymore?
I wonder, maybe you're right. Maybe that's what all this is about, because I'm sure there's a lot of interest now in, if you don't already have these books, to get the original copies, right? So you're going to pay close attention to is this like the latest edition, or is this like before a certain period where, the first few prints are the same, so like you don't have to get the very original copy of it, but just, until they started making these tweaks. And so maybe that will boost sales, because I'm sure there are people out there that are like, fuck that, I'm going to go ahead and buy this when it's available now, because maybe not this anniversary thing, but maybe in a few years they'll get rid of they'll just expunge the original works. And now this will be the new original works, That's a little conspiratorial.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a great conspiracy or anything along those lines, but it certainly could just be a marketing ploy. And certainly everybody's talking about Roald Dahl books in a way that they weren't not all that long ago.
Also, perhaps, the likely scenario is that they did not anticipate that anyone would sift through these changes that, on their own, maybe wouldn't be noticeable, like a sentence here, a word there. But when you lump it all together the way they did in that article, it becomes like, wow, what the fuck are they doing? So I don't think that they were anticipating somebody figuring it all out and having this big pushback, because so far it seemed like it's almost uniform, right? I haven't seen too many people on the other side of it saying, yeah, change things randomly. I'm all for that, because there's no one example where it's like some racial epithet was used and like, okay, I can kind of see, like there were no example of those. So like there's nothing really for someone to defend. It's just been all negative.
I mean, there are people on, I don't care to find them now, but there are people on Twitter who are insisting that the reaction to this is just reactionary bullshit from people who shouldn't care about such things, and that it's good that language changes and that these books are being rewritten to reflect more enlightened time, which I think is sort of obviously nonsense. And like, there's a reason that when you go to buy, assuming anybody ever goes to buy Mark Twain now, you go to Amazon, like the bestseller isn't going to be some asshole's reimagined version of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn where Huck doesn't say the N-word, right? Like sure, maybe you can buy ones where it's dashed out or it's just got a bunch of stars there or something like that. But I don't know who you're doing any favors with that either. Like, I don't know. It just seems like such a fucking shame. And why do we read these things in the first place? We read them because the author was intent on choosing these particular words to communicate a particular feeling and to entertain children above all else. And if it was good enough to entertain children for the last 50 years, I don't know what removing a description of a person's fatness does in terms of doing anybody any good. Especially
when it's being used to be descriptive. It's not being done out of malice or just to make fun. Oh, look at this fat shopkeeper. Just like they're just describing somebody. Just like there was another example of like they had like a horse face.
But even if it is to insult someone, even if it is to be shitty towards another human being, like usually when that's done by a character in a story, or by a narrator in a story, that's being done to tell you something about the character of that individual, right? That's each word is chosen to reveal something about the person observing it. And sometimes it reveals something unintentionally about the author and how they're a fucking bad person. Right. But that's the wages of being a person who puts their words out in public, right? Is that you are going to then be judged by the decisions that you made. And you can be and perhaps you can be found wanting if the words that you choose are legitimately, like you don't realize the thing that you're doing. But when you're putting the words or the descriptions in somebody else's mouth, you're trying to convey something about that person, about that character, and it doesn't actually say anything about you, the author.
Right. And sometimes people in the world do unkind things, and that reflects in the works of these people, right? But also the reason why, you're right, Bob, what you're saying is right, but the reason why I pointed that out is the people who are behind this, they have kind of lost the thread to such an extent that even when the words are not being used in a derogatory way, still get cut, right? Like even when people are using it in the most just innocuous kind of benign way, just like, hey, blah, 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 fat this, just to distinguish them or whatever, just give them some character, that doesn't make the cut because they kind of don't understand. They probably do understand, but they choose not to understand how words work, just so they can kind of remove it. This may be just because it's top of mind because it's been in the news the last month or so with this chatbot AI stuff. Any chance that this is like a program that did all this cutting? Because it does sound like it's devoid of a human discernment, like the way that the words are being cut.
What if I told you that human discernment is lacking in the type of person who decides that their job is to go out and look for offensive words? Right? What you have described in the form of an AI is just what you look for in the job description of somebody who wants to work at whatever bullshit company this is that went through with a fine-tooth comb and found all of the offensive words in Roald Dahl's books. And this is something, by the way, it's sort of academic. When we talk about it in terms of Roald Dahl, who's been dead now since 1990, been dead for quite some time. And this is, again, I think in all likelihood, just a too clever by half marketing ploy by his estate to get his name in the papers and then again in 3 or 5 years or something, release the original Roald Dahl as the good Lord intended. So that's Roald Dahl, who's been dead for a long time. This happens with, like, you are expected to have sensitivity readers if you are an author being published today. Most major publishing houses, unless you are a true household name, right? Unless you're somebody who's going to sell 1 million books no matter what, unless you're Stephen King or whatever, you are expected to endure this sensitivity reader shit where somebody of color or somebody of the correct minority status is going to read your work and figure out, based on who you are as an author, according to your various identity markers, what you are allowed to and not allowed to say in this context, and you will be expected to make edits of your work based on that. And as I said to you, it really might turn the old vanity self-publishing, like the vanity presses and the self-publishing stuff, away from being sort of a shameful, like, yeah, what the fuck is wrong with you? You can't be published by the traditional publishing houses, so you must suck at writing kind of thing, to like the only outlet for actual art to be done, right? Because there's simply, again, I would struggle having an editor of any sort tell me that, no, this sentence doesn't work. And I would then, like, if they decided that sentence didn't work, I would probably write them a 1,000-word essay on why I chose those words in that order. Like, what do you mean this sentence didn't work? I wrote that sentence over the course of 9 hours. I wrote that sentence literally 500 times. I chose each word and letter, including the misspelling, on purpose to communicate something in particular, and you're going to tell me that my sentence doesn't work? No, you don't get to do that. And that's just like a sentence that doesn't have any bad words in it, that doesn't convey any unacceptable ideas. That's just a sentence, right? And the idea that I would further endure a sensitivity reader who's going to tell me that, like, the biracial assistant manager in my pizza story is unacceptable for this reason and that reason and that reason, most of all because you as a white guy can't say those things about this biracial character. You're out of your fucking mind if you think I'm going to endure that sort of thing or change a single mark on the page because of what you have to say about it. That's none of your goddamn business. Like, absolutely not. And so that's how, like, I mean, this is assuming, of course, that I have a finished work that I want to present to an editor or a publisher, which, of course, I don't. I'm a horrible failure in that regard. But if that was the cost of doing business in this world, like, I simply wouldn't do it. That's how I end up at a fucking vanity press. That's how I end up self-published at Amazon, presumably.
But do you think that, based on the pushback that this story has gotten, it must be reassuring that we're not going in that direction, right? It's not like everybody was accepting of these changes. So, like, it's not like the future is going to be this thing, right? There's been some pushback.
Well, I don't know. We are clearly going in that direction. Like, I mean, like I said about the traditional publishing industry now, like, you can find endless stories in the last few years from writers talking about the sensitivity readings that they had to endure and the things that they had to change. And most people just go along with it because that's the cost of doing business in this world, right? Like, it's just what you have to do. And anybody who objects to the de-N-wordification of the Mark Twain collection is going to be accused of being a racist in some way because we're very dumb about the way that we imagine words can do harm. I don't know. Yes, it can be sort of clarifying in a moment like this for everyone to be angry and upset about this, and sort of a rare moment in which the literary establishment raises its head and seems to come together around the idea that this is a bad idea. But this is a product of a culture in the publishing world that already exists, right? That this deference to, and the funny thing is, because you read some of this stuff about how people start complaining about how the executives at all, like the big time editors at all these publishing houses it's all still too white, right? Like, yes, we publish a great deal of people of color and all of their all these 27-year-olds with their goddamn memoirs, but because they have the right identity characteristics, they get to write a book. That's fine. Good for them. But those same people complain about the fact that a lot of the editors and the higher-ups in the C-suites of these various publishing houses, there's still far too many whites there. But, of course, the whites that maintain there are the ones who capitulate to all of the nonsense about the sensitivity readers and making sure that no harm comes from any of the work that they do, right? Like, they sort of maintain their position in this world by deferring to by being an ally to the obnoxious woke types who come banging down their doors.
That is interesting.
And that's how they secure their own positions.
Yeah, because they're almost kind of like well versed in navigating this nonsense, right? They're kind of like experts at it, to where they can kind of deflect. Because, for instance, why are you carrying the works of that you find objectionable in the first place, right? Like, well, you're just masking a few words here or there, but you know what the original meaning was, and you're still profiting off of the works. Like, you don't have a problem to not carry the work, but you just want to, like, I don't know, make some cosmetic changes so you don't get any shit from people.
Right, because Roald Dahl was not a good dude, right?
So,
like, sort of widely acknowledged he was a fucking asshole, anti-Semite, and all the rest.
Yeah, that's
like,
didn't his family
not a great
have
guy.
to put out a thing about his supposed anti-Semitism? But, like, yeah, why are you, you're okay with that, but you're pretending you're not when it comes to, like, a word here and there. The other question I have is, I don't know the answer to this, because these book companies, they have all these different names, but they're all under one major umbrella company. Like, there are all these different outfits of Simon and Schuster. Like, how many of these companies are there, the big ones, that control all the little ones? Like, if you were to say, I don't want to go through this vetting process for, like, words that somebody may find objectionable, there are only so many that control all the different imprints, right? Like, so if you take your business somewhere else, then where do you end up? Like what you were saying earlier, just self-publish?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. And yeah, I mean, maybe it's just a passing thing. Maybe it is. Maybe this sort of broad negative reaction to it puts a stop to some of the more absurd examples going forward. That's only one half of the reference that I made in my opening rant there. The second half of that rant about how the center not holding is sort of a broad reaction to something that happened in the middle of last week, which we will refer to as nytletter.com, which was a letter put out by a broad collection of New York Times contributors, not staffers exactly, but people who were claimed to have contributed to the paper in the past at some point. Initially, it was signed by some 180 New York Times contributors, and then that eventually it became signed by many hundreds more of them, I think approaching 1,000 or something like that, if not more. And then also, because it's a public open letter, anybody can just write in and say that they have some sort of connection to the media landscape and put their name on it. I believe if we so chose, you could email your name and get it signed to the bottom of this letter. Essentially, just to summarize, it's basically a letter that says, we disapprove of the way trans issues have been covered by the New York Times, especially over the course of the last year or so, and that it smacks of the sort of homophobia and derision towards gay people that the Times was famous for 100 fucking years ago, and that sort of thing.
Probably more recent than that, too, but yeah.
Yes, and also more recent than that, but it specifically singles out Emily Bazelon's article from 8 or 9 months ago called The Battle Over Gender Therapy, which we talked about on the show before, and also the more recent article by someone named Katie J.M. Baker. Katie Baker wrote, When Students Change Gender Identity and Parents Don't Know, which is something that we talked about on the podcast, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, which is all about schools hiding the gender transition of students from parents. And I will just read from the letter now. It's addressed to the Standards editor, who is Philip Corbett, Associate Managing Editor for Standards at the New York Times. Dear Philip, we write to you as a collective of New York Times contributors with serious concerns about editorial bias in the newspaper's reporting on transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. Plenty of reporters at the Times cover trans issues fairly. Their work is eclipsed, however, by what one journalist has calculated as over 15,000 words of front-page Times coverage debating the propriety of medical care for trans children published in the last 8 months alone. The newspaper's editorial guidelines demand demand that reporters, quote, preserve a professional detachment free of any whiff of bias, end quote, when cultivating their sources, remaining, quote, sensitive that personal relationships with news sources can erode into favoritism in fact or appearance, end quote. Yet the Times has in recent years treated gender diversity with an eerily familiar mix of pseudoscience and euphemistic charged language, while publishing reporting on trans children that omits relevant information about its sources. As I said, they go on to single out Emily Bazelon, who wrote what was, by all appearances, a very fair and, I mean, obviously the term fair and balanced is sort of freighted these days, but what seemed to me to be a fair and balanced approach to the question, this is what they say. They say that Emily Bazelon's article uncritically used the term patient zero to refer to a trans child seeking gender-affirming care, a phrase that vilifies transness as a disease to be feared. So this is their lead example of Bazelon's and the New York Times' sin here, is the use of this phrase patient zero in her article, which has been used as you can imagine it being used like in the context of some sort of flu or some sort of other disease that goes around where somebody is the first person to transmit the thing and they're like the prime vector for this disease. Right. As if so the implication here is that Emily Bazelon is using this term in the way that bad people use this term to talk about transness in a way that is unfair to trans people. Now, unfortunately, in the context of the article, she's just using it as the patient refers to themselves, right? So they were the first person to receive the so-called Dutch protocol. They were the first person to receive this new standard of care, and the people who provided that standard of care to them, who affirmed their gender in the parlance of our times, used that phrase, patient zero, in their conversations with Emily Bazelon. Right. And so did the patient themselves refer to themselves as patient zero. So their prime example here at the lead of their letter is to mischaracterize just to factually mischaracterize, to tell a lie about what Emily Bazelon does with that particular phrase. And they go on in the next criticism of Katie Baker's article to insist that she did not properly identify certain groups as being affiliated with other more distasteful groups. So back from the letter. In a similar case, Katie Baker's recent feature, When Students Change Gender Identity and Parents Don't Know, misframed the battle over children's right to safely transition. Which, first of all, before I go on, insisting that it's being misframed when the headline is When Students Change Gender Identity and Parents Don't Know is actually a perfect framing of the subject of the article, right? Which is that children are changing their gender identity and the parents don't know. What other framing is there? That is the framing of the article, because that's the article she was assigned to write. Right. You can't be upset that she did the thing that she set out to do. Like that's not misframing. You just disagree with the idea that this is something that's worth talking about, but you don't get to decide what articles they write. I'm sorry, but like it's not up to you. It's up to the journalists and to their editors to decide that. Anyway, continuing the quote, the piece fails to make clear that court cases brought by parents who want schools to out their trans children are part of a legal strategy pursued by anti-trans hate groups. These groups have identified trans parents as an, quote, existential threat to society and seek to replace the American public education system with Christian homeschooling. Key context Baker did not provide to Times readers. And I, reading this letter some 2 or 3 weeks after first reading Katie Baker's article, knew this was false. I clicked on the link, I went to the article, and I found in the body of the article that exact thing. That quote, existential threat to society, comes from the Katie Baker article. She actually does disclose that they're working with this group that is shitty in this way in the original article. So the two main examples that this letter gives, that thousands of journalists have since signed, are completely false. And then they get mad that they're being lumped in with activists. Like, of course you're going to be lumped in with activists. You're doing activism. You have no concern for the truth. And the idea that you can scroll down and find good journalists and smart people on this list. Ed Young, the lead science writer for The Atlantic, is on this list. David Itzkoff, he's an entertainment reporter for the New York Times, is on this list. There are dozens of otherwise smart and who I would have assumed were actors in good faith and journalists doing good work where the truth matters, who signed to this letter, which is just a series of lies and personal attacks against journalists who they believe have stepped outside the correct frame, the correct moral frame on an issue.
So a couple of things, watching sports the way that I do, I always make these stupid comparisons to sports when it doesn't apply. But this bears a striking resemblance to working the refs. Like what these people, the undersigned, want to do, they can't do anything about past stories that has already been covered, but just make them think of the 1,000 names going forward. So that basically they're like shamed into like going out of their way to be fair to them, right? So basically it's like, I mean, as you described, really they didn't do anything wrong in their original coverage. I mean, they're ascribing malice to Emily Bazelon the way she's characterizing something that someone else has used the same terminology, right? But they're saying you're using it as if it's a communicable disease, like, you do with like AIDS or something else. That's not the connection she was drawing, but they're ascribing that to her. And then the framing of the headline, which, as you say, if you're just walking by and you back in the old days when people actually had newspapers and you pick up that newspaper and you read that headline, you get the message what the story is going to cover. Like, it's a pretty good way to phrase it, but they're probably thinking the story is here, the people transitioning. Why are you worried about the few parents who are going to be upset? Like, basically they're like minimized, or they're saying that that's not important. Don't cover that. Basically they're working the reference to like what not to cover. They're not saying that.
Right. And also this thing that is becoming far more prevalent in the culture as any decent poll on this suggests. You ask these people, are you boomers, any of these letters? And the answer is 1 in 20. And then you come all the way down to Gen Z, people born between 1997 and 2003, roughly, and it's 1 in 5, right? And including massive increases, not just in the bisexual and queer identity, but in the trans identity and the gender non-conforming identity. So this thing that is ascendant in the culture is actually vanishingly small, these people insist. They say it is, in fact, so small that it's not worthy of covering. And I know that what's about to come out of my mouth is completely unfair.
Yeah.
But there were 62 million police interactions in the year 2018, and fewer than 1,000 citizens died as a result of those interactions, which is a completely inconsequential percentage of 62 million, right? Well, and that's all of the citizen deaths. That's 990 people died at police hands in 2018 out of 62 million police interactions. That doesn't, to say nothing of how many of those people were fighting with the cops and fucking had it coming, right? How many of those people were involved in some sort of other violent interaction? I can't handle this.
But Bob,
this is a vanishingly small thing that we shouldn't pay any attention to. It doesn't deserve this kind of coverage when we have an entire media ecosystem devoted to elevating the anecdote, to taking this awful event that happens in North Carolina, for example, or this awful thing that happens to George Floyd a couple of years ago, and it becomes the most dominant thing in the entire culture for years because of a couple of anecdotes, right, that do not represent anything like the whole. Are they representative of a system? Yeah, probably. In certain ways, it fucking matters, right? And we should have these conversations. But don't tell me that you can't have these conversations because it's only affecting some small percentage of children and that therefore it doesn't warrant this amount of coverage. Right. Bullshit. So you're trying to hide something.
Okay. On the police front, I mean, that's the way that I compare that to would be the airline industry. You can't say we had a banner year because only 62 planes went down when there's like 60 million that didn't. Like,
I said it wasn't fair, right. All right? I said it wasn't fair.
On the other issue, like I said, the problem that I have is whenever a story is covered, the approach that some are taking is that you have to cover it only in one way. Otherwise, you're doing harm, or you're going to be linked to any sort of violence that comes the way of somebody in the community. Like
Emily Bazelon is giving succor to transphobes, essentially. Emily Bazelon, according to this letter, and this is not a quote, but effectively what they're saying is that they are painting Emily Bazelon and the New York Times editorial decisions as genocide heirs in the same way that anybody who questions the right of trans people to exist are genocide heirs, right? That there's pure moral equivalence between Emily Bazelon, a good-hearted liberal by all accounts, right? Somebody who approaches this topic with compassion and care and empathy in a way that these people clearly wouldn't even fucking begin to recognize in terms of their interactions with other human beings, of which Emily Bazelon is one, right? But you're going to take her and you're going to throw her under the fucking bus because you don't fucking care. Anyway, completely lost the thread there. I forget what I was saying.
So, okay, can I just talk about the 180 people that saw 180 people, or it's upwards of 1,000 now? Like, I don't know what the current number is, but it ballooned right over the days since this has come out. Do you think, at least my impression is, that this is almost like politicians who do the symbolic vote to something that's never going to go anywhere? So their calculation for some of these reporter, journalists, whatever, in the orbit of the New York Times, right? They've had some sort of connection in the past to the New York Times. Their math, their calculation must be, this is not going anywhere. Who was the guy that's at the Standards desk? Patrick or whatever his name is? Philip. Yeah, Philip, this guy. He's going to do what he's going to do, right? He's not going to change the policies because some people wrote a letter, right? Everybody kind of understands that. And so they're like, I get to still go to these stupid dinner parties. I still hang out. You know, there's the correspondence dinner thing coming up soon. You know, I think the calculation must be, I'm just going to put my name there, look like I'm some sort of ally, and people will leave me alone. Like, the calculation is, I'm going to get more shit if I don't sign, and people online will figure it out. Hey, I didn't see your name there. What gives, buddy? I thought you were one of our people, right? And so just to avoid that headache, I think people are signing on to something knowing that nothing will come of it. I mean, you know, according to you, you know, you think lesser of some of them for ceding this ground. Like, this is you shouldn't have done this if you're going to be like a impartial reporter. But it does sound like they're almost like bending to the constituent will, which is fine if you're a politician. But if you're a reporter or a journalist, that's not really your role. You don't have any constituents, or specific constituents. You're just some guy reporting or some gal reporting, and just do that.
I mean, again, the language of disgust and despicable does no good for anybody in any context, generally speaking. But I find myself so disappointed with this, with the idea that a bunch of journalists would sign on to this thing when it is clearly just full of falsehoods. And what drives me nuts about it in particular is the fact that it cites the citation of these articles in bad laws or out of the mouths of the fact that it's giving succor to the enemies of the movement or the enemies of gender ideology movement is what aligns now Emily Bazelon and Ross Douthat and Katie Baker with being on the wrong side of history, more or less, right? Like, it's this insistence that because bad things are happening in Florida and Kansas and Arkansas and Utah on this front, like things that are legitimately unacceptable, right? And this is where the middle has to hold. This is where it matters more than anything else to speak out against the awful laws in Florida, the awful and more so than the laws even at this point, but the rhetoric around it, right? That what Utah is going to do that is going to ban all quote unquote gender affirming. And by the way, the phrase gender affirming care alone is ideologically loaded, right? So when you're talking about youth gender medicine and gender affirming care, that itself is euphemistically, ideologically loaded. And I don't even think that people hear themselves saying it when they say the words gender affirming care. They don't realize how much politics is preloaded into that sentence.
Do.
How much has been.
What would be another way to describe it? I would just thought basically, yes, you can make that
sex
claim.
Change.
a sex change, because it's like an umbrella term. It doesn't necessarily involve a sex change, right? Or does it?
Because you don't want to. Because the marketing of giving sex change hormones to children is fucking awful, right?
Right.
Like that doesn't fly with the general public.
Right.
But gender affirming care definitely flies, right? Because it seems so positive and good and fine.
Right.
Anyway, the point here is that the Ron DeSantis's of the world, the shitty politicians in Utah who have bad ideas on this stuff, they are wrong, right? And they're going to continue to exploit this in ways that are wrong and bad. That doesn't mean that these assholes who signed the New York Times letter are right? That doesn't mean that when misleading statements get made on NPR about the science is settled on this, that there's actually nothing to worry about here, because the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Medical Association and all of these expert groups have come to final terms on all of this stuff, and anybody who raises any questions about it is just being a bigot. You're simply uninformed if that's your position now, and at some point that will be an untenable position to continue to hold, because that is an extreme position. That is an extreme position that masquerades as the middle, when in fact the middle is we don't fucking know. Right? And so everybody who cites and there's so much reading to be done on this subject, and I don't pretend to be an expert here, and of course I don't. But like all you other assholes who do, because you say the science is actually settled here, when it only takes like an hour worth of reading to realize, holy shit, the science on this shit isn't actually settled. And in fact, to the extent that it was settled even a year ago, some of these like the Dutch protocol no longer in effect in a way that a lot of people believe it to be. Finland and Sweden have both rolled back what they believe to have been good laws just a couple of years ago, because they've decided that their approach was wrong. The United Kingdom had a big scandal about giving way too many kids, quote unquote, gender affirming care, when and the results from that have been bad. And so they have stopped doing a lot of the stuff that they've been doing over the last few years, because they believe, because new science has come in, because new studies have been done, and this insistence that anybody who raises any questions about it is just a bigot is fucking nonsense. There's a key point here in the Dutch protocol, and I'll explain it as succinctly as I can. But imagine that you have a group of 1,000 children who present with so-called gender dysphoria, or with some gender non-conforming ideas about themselves, right? Then you take an extended period of time and you've eliminated 900 of them, right? Like, actually, we have none of these problems. You don't actually have the problems that you thought you had, or you grew out of it, or you stopped presenting, or whatever the fuck it is. 900 of you no longer worry about. And then a further 60 of them drop off as well after that. Like, you go another 6 months, and now we're down to like 40 fucking people. And so now this is a study that started with 1,000 people, but now it's down to just 40 people. And then you study these people, and they receive quote unquote gender affirming care. They're given hormones, they're given social transition, and they are given surgeries, right? And then you go and you talk to those people a year later, and you find out that this worked out for 39 out of the 40 people, right? That only one person regrets having gone through this process. And now you say, well, this worked in 39 out of 40 cases. The Dutch protocol must fucking work, right? But no, in fact, all of this care that they got worked for 39 out of 1,000 people, not 39 out of 40, right? So you've done, when you go and you look at this study and you say, oh, wow, what a tremendous success for 39 out of 40 people. Well, yeah, that's because they solved the so-called comorbidities, the other mental problems that were presenting with this gender dysphoric stuff. If they gave them Adderall, they fixed their ADHD, and then all of a sudden they weren't presenting as gender dysphoric anymore, right? But that person doesn't end up in the quote-unquote Dutch protocol, because they left before they got to this far into the thing, right? Right. To take the lesson from the Dutch protocol to be that, as the American Academy of Pediatrics or the American Medical Association says, it is always good to socially transition and then give hormones to after some period of consultation, right? After some number of visits, or making sure they're serious about it. kids who present with gender dysphoria, not taking into account the fact that the studies that showed this showed that you have to first eliminate all of these other problems first before you start giving them the gender transition stuff, right? Like, and I don't pretend to know all of the ins and outs of this. I don't pretend to know all of the answers here, but don't come at me saying that you know all of the answers here.
Who's coming at you? Jesus.
The entire this letter, the entire anytime that anybody who gets upset about J.K. Rowling on the internet for having quote unquote transphobic problems, for people who talk about how in an NPR story, when I hear that getting upset about youth gender transition is just bigotry, is fucking nonsense. It's a big deal to take a 10-year-old and put them on puberty blockers if they're also if this is a new thing that they're presenting with, and they also are presenting with like depression and autism and who knows whatever the fuck else is going on in their lives, right? We don't actually know this, and to insist that we do is to tell a lie about the world.
Now, you said something that was unfair or whatever, however you characterize it. So I'm going to throw this out there. Like, are people trying to turn science into a new religion? Like, what is going on with this over-reliance on drugs? Wasn't that a couple weeks ago or a week ago where the American Association for some other thing, like with kids and their obesity, they're like, just fucking give them drugs. You know, like everything seems to be just give them drugs. Like, how is that always the solution to everything? Like, just give them drugs. And on the point, now you said you're not an expert at this. I am further removed of this issue than even you are because you at least have kids. I don't have any kids. So my question is, my ignorant question, would a tomboy of yesteryear be a suitable candidate for gender-affirming care today? Like, where the passage of time solved that whatever issue there was, right?
That's the thing. Like, that's what's happening.
Right. Just
not all the time.
Yeah.
But if a kid is saying, like, I think I want to be a boy.
Right.
I wish I were a boy. Now it's not like, oh, okay.
Right.
It's like, oh.
Right. So it's not...
Okay, well, we'll go talk to a therapist about it right now.
Right. So basically, again...
Like, whatever.
Very removed from all of this, but, like, is everything that comes out of a kid's mouth actionable? I mean, just sometimes kids say stuff. It's like, okay.
You send them to Montessori school.
You're not going to jump on it. Like, and also, what's with this? We're under the pressure of time. These things must happen at... Like,
well, that's a thing because puberty happens.
Okay. So they're trying to make a decision before the consequences are hard to undo? Like...
Yeah,
and
or
that's,
something.
That's
if
where,
that's what you want to do.
If you've had a child who, since they were 2 years old, has insisted that they're in the wrong body, right? Who has insisted that they want to be a little boy when they were born a girl, or they want to be a little girl when they were born a boy, and that's something that you've dealt with for like literally their whole lives, then that's an interesting conversation to have, I think. And also, it's still a fucking big trade-off. Because if you put a little boy on puberty blockers at age 10 and make sure he doesn't go through normal male puberty, you will have impacted his bone density, right? You will have impacted any number of other things in his life. He might not ever be able to orgasm, for example. All these things that are like super uncomfortable to talk about. And this is something else I mentioned to Lori the other day. Like, in a way, we're becoming more puritanical on the issue of homosexuality than we were before, right? Which, like... it is a super uncomfortable conversation or even thought to have to imagine your 9 or 10-year-old boy is a homosexual, right? Like it's like, because now you're trying to imagine, like, what do you mean you're 10 and you're gay? Like 10-year-olds don't have that sort of, like, wait, I have to think about my child's like sexual impulse right now? Right. Like, that's super fucking uncomfortable. Yeah. What if we could not talk about that? What if instead of being gay and thinking about my little boy sucking dick someday, which is like super gross and makes me feel awful about things, what if instead he's just a girl? Right? Yeah. Are you sure that maybe you just feel more comfortable with girls because you are a girl? Like, that's why you like to hang out with girls all the time. Maybe that's just how you are. And let's go down that road. Let's talk to a doctor about maybe putting off puberty. So let's just slow everything down here till we can figure things out, right? Till we can figure out what the hell is going on before we talk about my son sucking any dicks around here.
Right.
And that's obviously a offensive way of speculating about the culture in the moment. But the whole thing is obviously way more complicated than anyone wants to give it credit for. And the fact that Ron DeSantis is an asshole about this does not give license to people who imagine themselves to be kind and be empathetic and to always be on the right side of history to tell lies about the world and to insist that anybody who has questions about the way things are or the way things might be is being a bigot.
Right. And I think part of the reason why a DeSantis and other types are kind of gravitating towards issues such as this is because they see a vulnerability. And I think the biggest problem with the letter and other such efforts is that the attempt is like they're not trying to argue the point. They're trying to just kind of drown out or shame or shun any sort of dissenting voice. However lightly the dissenting opinion is just like one aspect of the overarching thing, right? Overall, I'm with it, I'm cool, but maybe not when they're 8, like, oh, no, you can't say that. You're no better than so-and-so. Basically, you're being lumped into the worst elements on the other side for raising any dissenting opinion. I think it was 60 Minutes on CBS. I believe it was Anderson Cooper. Wasn't there a story where there were some stories where...
I think it was Leslie Stahl.
Okay.
I think it was Leslie Stahl, and it was another one of these things where, like, somebody talked to a detransitioner, and the entire gender ideology side of things freaked the fuck out. And, like, Lori says, like, who are we talking about here? Like who are you even mad about? And it's like, it is tempting because the middle is so vast, right? Because I think that the gender ideologist types represent a very small sliver of this, and as do the reactionary Ron DeSantis types represent a very small sliver of this. It's tempting to just ignore it and to say, like, what are we talking about here? But again, the lesson of Yeats, sorry for doing poetry, but the lesson there is that when these extremes are fighting, the center actually cannot hold as a neutral ground, right? The center has to actively defend itself, or it will be torn asunder.
Right.
Like that's how this works. Is that if you elect to ignore the absolute maniacs will just yell louder.
But how
right?
did we get rid of the satanic panic?
They will have this existential fight, whether we want it to be happening or not. And it is important that people who recognize it as more complicated than the priests of the revealed truths on either side are willing to make it be, actually speak up and have their voices heard too.
Right, but that's a good point. On that 60 Minutes piece, though, what's troubling about this whole thing is that there are people that want to create this environment where any sort of dissenting or any opinion that runs counter to the whatever they want to be true gets criticized, right? So on one hand, you're saying, let's go forth with the settled science, right? And if you talk about any other thing, we're going to come after you. And then if you shine a light on maybe it's a rare occurrence, right, where people, detransition and they had a negative experience, but like it happened, right? You're not saying that those examples did not happen, but for you to come back out and say that shouldn't be covered, like you're creating this weird environment to where nothing that goes against whatever we want to be true should be covered because it's going to whatever, right? Like to me, that's a weird place to be. You should be able to kind of talk through something, and it makes wherever you land on, whatever position you land on, stronger for the rigorous discussion to point out the negative sides of it. Like parents have no rights. I mean, like, what are we talking about? Like none of this stuff doesn't make sense, but people don't want to talk through it because they're like, we've already decided we're going this route. So anything else you say runs counter to what we want. And that's not, I don't think, is a very healthy way to go about anything. Just talk it out. Like, people have concerns, talk through the concerns like you do with anything else.
And at the same time, that another major part of the discourse right now is about how young people, and especially young girls, are more depressed than they've ever been at any point in recorded history, right? So at the same time that, and I do not, like, I simply, you cannot make all of the different threads cohere into one consistent narrative here, right? Because we're living at a time of more acceptance and more tolerance for various lifestyles than at any other point in American history, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not wrong about that.
It's not perfect today, but relative
Nobody says it's perfect.
Right.
But like,
relative to everything else.
To fucking 20 years ago, when everybody's running around screaming faggot at each other, like, it's clearly better now in certain ways, right? We are wildly more accepting. There's gay marriage now. Unthinkable way more recently than anybody gives it credit for, right? Far more tolerant society on all of this stuff, as evidenced by the fact, no doubt, that 1 in 5 youths of today are perfectly comfortable identifying as somewhere on the LGBTQ plus questioning spectrum. And that's fine, and that's good. But that must be understood also in terms of the fact that people are wildly less mentally healthy, according to every measure that we have now, especially young people. That doesn't mean that they go hand in hand, in the same way that it doesn't mean that social media automatically makes people more depressed necessarily, hand in hand, but they do correlate in some way, right? The two things must be understood to exist at the same time. You cannot tell me that, in fact, we are living under oppressive regimes that make all of these people completely, that at the same time that we're living under this oppressive regime that makes life intolerable and makes these people more depressed and more likely to do self-harm, at the same time that we are more inclusive and more tolerant of every imaginable lifestyle than we have ever been at any point in recent human history.
Right.
They simply don't go together. And I don't know. It seems like it's a fixation of mine lately, I suppose, and I recognize that, and I don't want it to be a fixation of mine.
So stop reading about it.
But it also feels like something that's very important to me because so much of the media class, as evidenced by this fucking letter, believes that this is an existential war worth waging in some way, that it has become sort of the primary front in the culture wars in a way that as a lot of other fronts of the culture wars have becoming less important because of the fractured nature of the media landscape. This is the one that has sort of risen to the top and seems to be the only one that really matters anymore.
Do you, on that point, I would wonder, because everything else I can understand, but like, why do certain stories gain prominence? Like, this is like kind of like in a sports betting, like they set it at 1.5 because there's like even money on both sides. Are these issues that make it to the top? Like, why is there so much talk about like trans issues or whatever the issues of the day is, right? Why do they hold so much prominence over other stories that we could be talking about? Like, there isn't like a science that says somebody decided this is the most important thing, but people kind of like gravitate towards certain stories. And I wonder if it's like, these are the stories that are most contentious, and so that's why they rise to the top. I never understood that. Like, why is it that this is talked about so much compared to 10 years ago? I mean, I guess 10 years ago it was the gay stuff, right? And so once that's settled, maybe this is a new frontier, and that's why it's being talked about. Maybe it's that. Like, yeah,
but I still don't think it's fair to consider this on some sort of continuum with gay rights. The transgender rights question in terms of like workplace discrimination is settled. Like there's nothing more to talk about on that. The Supreme Court has decided that the Equal Rights Amendment applies to transgender individuals, right? Like this has all been figured out. They're not going to legislate on this stuff beyond this youth gender medicine stuff. And it's awful. It's an awful conversation to have, but it becomes an impossible conversation to have if the terms of the debate are set by people on the one side saying that you're a demonic groomer, right? That's the Chris Rufo, the Ron DeSantis way of framing it, that this is about adults and like weirdo adults playing out their own sexual fantasies on children. And on the other hand, insisting that the science is settled, which is a nonsensical phrase that happens to, in this case, also not be true.
Also, anytime somebody says the science settled, I'm like, oh boy, give it a couple of years. There's always going to be some new story that will come out. Just like with, remember there was like, only a few months, but at the tail end of the pandemic period where people were like, oh, the vaccine is actually better for you than like getting infected. And now they're like, oh, no, fuck all that. What our original understanding of how this works is actually how it works. And but for a while there was like, no, this is the way. It's better to do it this way. And it's just like, maybe, but give it a couple of years. That's why I would say time solves everything, like whatever discussion people had 2 years ago, the answer now. And with this thing, we'll know in a few years when the dust settles.
Speaking of the vaccine and getting COVID and having that be a better protection, that it is interesting now that they're sort of coming around on this idea that boosters should not be necessary for anybody who has been boosted up to this point and also had the virus.
Yeah.
That there's basically no added protection that is conferred upon a person by getting a further booster. And like, that's just, I don't know. There are all sorts of things that we're going to find out about these last few years moving forward. And again, like, it is so crucial that the middle hold here, because you already have people, the whole hashtag died suddenly movement, right? This idea that anybody who dies in a slightly incongruous way must have died because of the vaccine, right? They must have died because of a vast international conspiracy hatched by the United States and China, which is fucking complete nonsense, right? But also, we need to be able to take seriously the fact that our public health officials insisted that, and really they were probably just trying to do their best, but they were wrong, right? But they were wrong.
Or the ones that did say that. I don't think everybody wasn't like 100% in agreement, but there were some people that were pushing it. And the problem isn't that you're right or wrong. It's just this arrogant confidence that comes with it. Like, shut the fuck up. This is the way. And it's like, it could be the way, but could you just be a little more humble about it? Like, you don't have to be such a dick about it.
No, but people who get to be in charge are always that way.
Yeah.
That's how they got to be in
charge.
charge.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah.
I want to touch on this one thing I heard on the Barry Weiss podcast. It's called Honestly. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes.
Is that a good podcast?
Generally, I would not say that is a good podcast as a hard and fast rule.
Not a deal breaker for me. You don't have to be good for me to listen to it, but
right. It's one of those that like I pick and choose. Like I don't need to listen to every episode. Yeah. I think that they do fine work there from time to time.
Guest heavy kind of thing. Like every episode has somebody that they have on to talk through something.
Right, with a general sort of focus on the normal slate of heterodox topics that somebody like Barry Weiss is going to be interested in. I bring it up because they had a debate about the recent conversations that we had as recently as last week about the fat people drugs and giving children weight loss drugs and also surgery. And the person that they had on, who was sort of on the side of let's treat obesity as a medical problem and give kids drugs, and basically it's like, look, no matter what you think about the underlying causes here, I am a doctor doing care of a human being who walks into my office. There's only so much that I can do, right? Like I can't fix the fact that our entire food delivery and nutrition system is completely fucking fucked. And like I'm putting words in her mouth basically, but the sort of exasperated position is like, yeah, you're not wrong that we eat like shit and we eat too many processed foods and everybody's too fucking fat. And like a big problem is the corporate interests of pharmaceutical companies and the corporate interests of these food processing companies, right? These massive multinational corporations. Like that's a huge fucking problem. But also, I can't fix that. So today I can give them this drug. And yes, does that only reinforce the problems of the system? Because now this person thinks they can eat whatever the fuck they want to eat and they just keep eating garbage. And now they're going to be a lifelong customer of this drug. Yeah. And that fucking sucks. But like, what am I going to do about it? I can't fix Monsanto and the entire food delivery system and Pfizer and all the rest. So whatever. So that's the most sympathetic way of portraying the sort of medical interventionist side of this, I think. But I also wanted to play this clip because the doctor who's making sort of that argument, as I've said on the show before, I struggle when people start arguing about nature versus nurture, because it becomes a completely meaningless thing a lot of the time, because nature is just nurture over an extremely long period of time, right? That like genetics is just the expression of how a specimen or a creature has lived in an environment over many, many generations, right? That's all it is. Nature and nurture are the same thing. And I know that's very reductive and a silly way of putting it, but I want to play this clip from this doctor here which makes the point explicit.
I think this is where Callie's argument becomes really compelling to me, because if obesity is genetic, where was this disease 50 years ago, right? Like in the 1960s, between 5 and 7% of American children were obese. Today it is 1 in 5 children. Like, did we all magically get afflicted with these new genetics in the past 50 years? And if it is genetic, why are Americans uniquely afflicted by these terrible genes? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, and so that's where this quote comes into play, which I'm blanking in the moment on who says it, but genetics loads the gun and then the environment pulls the trigger. So our environment has really capitalized on the underlying genetic susceptibility to excess body weight. It's been there the whole time, but now we're doing more and more things in our day-to-day lives to augment and make the body weight excess increase.
All right, I'm going to stop it there, because what she just said is it's actually just the environment. Like she's insisting that it's genetics, but what she's saying is that in fact it's genetics, but actually it's the environment, right? So that it's in a question of nature versus nurture. She says it's definitely nature, except for the 100% of it, which is definitely nurture. Right?
Maybe she meant something. I don't know, but like it is funny because. In another way to put that is basically humans have always been susceptible to this, and it just happened recently when we started eating all this stuff.
Humans, the human animal has spent hundreds of thousands of years, and then animals millions upon millions upon millions of years of resource hoarding, right? The resources are scarce, and so we ingest them and try to hold on to them for as long as fucking possible, right? Yeah. It's what makes animals fucking work. The reason that we survive is that we get the rare thing, we put it in our fucking bodies, and we then use it up. Right? Yeah. And so the more of it that we can hang on to, the better it is going to be for us in the long term. So then we get to a point of like absurd overabundance, right? We get to modernity when we now have an amount of calories at our ready and easy disposal that was previously unthinkable for not just hundreds of thousands of years, but hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary pressure, right? Are acting upon us now. Of course, it's genetics in that way, but it's genetics in a way that the environment simply could not provide us with previously. And now that it can, and by the way, when you think about like the people for whom it could provide it, rich people 1,000 years ago, those were the only fucking fat people, right?
That was a sign
your
of
kings and your queens.
Yeah, that was a sign of
they were fucking fat because they had abundant resources from which they could lazily choose from.
And they didn't have to do shit.
And they didn't have to fucking do anything. They just sat around and people brought them food and they ate it, and that was the fucking good life, right? So like, of course it's fucking nurture. What are you talking about? It's not the environment, it's your genetics. Who are you trying to let off the hook here? Are you trying to make a person feel better about themselves? Yes. Like, is that all that is?
Yes.
It's this insistence that, oh, you don't have to feel bad about it because it's just your genetics? Like, of course it's your fucking genetics.
There must
What are you talking about?
There must be no, I mean, that's got to be the reason why. It's just like people. Well, what's odd about it, what you said, you know, it's not just overabundance. It's like now there are billion-dollar companies who go out of their way to engineer food to exploit all of our human weaknesses, right? You know, big fans of the salt and the fat and the, like all of that stuff. Like we have all the food is perfectly designed to bypass any sort of thing, like any sort of like restraint or I'm not that hungry. Like food makes you want to eat it and then you're hungry in like an hour, right? Like other food, you know, more like, you know, like sweet potatoes or whatever, long lasting, you're satiated, you're fine, you know, like natural foods. It's a while before you're hungry again, but because they want to make money, food is designed in such a way to where you're eating over and over and over and over again. Junk food, you're always eating it because your brain is thinking more and more and more. So if you want to point to something, that could work. I mean, but this weird, like, oh, you're just born with it? Like, I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. And yeah, it doesn't change the fact. Yeah, sure. Some people are predisposed to hold on to more weight than other people are, right? Like, but I'm sorry, I'm just far more sympathetic to this, to the side of things that says we are making ourselves sick with the way that we consume and the way that we handle food distribution sort of as a global society right now, and this idea that essentially it exists beyond our agency. Maybe it does. Maybe it does exist beyond individual agency of weak-willed humans who can't be expected to. And I sympathize with that, right?
It's interesting because I've been thinking about this. Like in Japan, I ordered those highly processed foods from Japan. They do processed food, but it's viewed as an unusual thing to eat.
Yeah.
It's not like what's for dinner, your Frankenfood.
Right.
Like they eat real food for dinner, but then their snack is like, ooh, magic soy, potato, rice, fish, sugar chips.
Like a treat or something. Yeah, it's not.
It's a treat. It's an unusual thing.
Right. The point is that, yes, it might be beyond the individual will to be able to do anything about this in your own personal miserable life, but it doesn't make it beyond the collective will, right? It doesn't mean that we can't make these fundamental changes to things with enough collective action. And I think that you're going to get a better chance at securing that sort of collective action that can make a difference in hundreds of millions of people's lives if you're honest about things. And that's something that I keep coming back to. But it is just as dumb for some hardo to go on TikTok and say, you just choose to eat the grilled chicken and the steamed broccoli, and that's how you fix your fucking life, you fucking bums. Like, that's just as dumb as the doctor who says, well, I can't do anything about anything except prescribe you this drug.
If it was presented that way.
And get a 12-year-old hooked for, you're just going to be on Ozempic for fucking 70 or 80 years as long as you live.
I don't know. How expensive are those things? I mean, I don't understand why you would want more people to be on drugs. There are enough people who need the drugs that they're on, right? You're just born with whatever, and you have to have them. Why are you, creating scenarios where millions of more people are on something that they could avoid? If you can avoid drugs, you would prefer not to be on drugs for the rest of your life,
the
right?
The drug company doesn't want them to not be on the drugs, though.
Yeah. That's true. But if they presented the information look, we're basically kind of at a triage stage, and it's not important to me why people are at such a heavy weight. We need to find a way out. If they just said that would be one thing. But if you're kind of making up this scenario where it's really something you were born with, that's going to run afoul of what people see. That's not true.
Right. Well, the side effects of Ozempic are overwhelmingly feeling nauseous and making yourself feel so full that you don't want to go on eating, right? That's the primary side effect. And in fact, that's how the drug works. The reason that you lose weight is because you are made to feel over full and often nauseous. In other words, they've taken a Clockwork Orange treatment procedure and applied it to food, which is the way that Alex in A Clockwork Orange was prevented from doing ultraviolence and rape and murder.
How'd you quit smoking, Bob?
I didn't make myself physically ill at the thought of having a cigarette. I just did it through self-hatred and discipline.
Natural hate.
And berating myself, yes. But that's different than taking a pill that makes you feel sick so you won't want to eat anymore. That was presented as a dystopian reality of a future fascistic government who's going to make you feel bad about following your natural human urges. And now it's in pill form so that you won't be as fucking fat. You're still going to eat fucking garbage, and you're not going to be a very healthy person, but at least you won't be fucking fat anymore.
Is Ozempic the one that does some – it kind of ages your face, or there's some weird symptom that's I don't know if it's Ozempic.
So there's reason to think that the reason that your face looks old is because all of the fat comes out of it and you just get saggy.
Oh.
So you need to combine the fat loss with a facelift, and then you won't look so old anymore.
How is this a winning formula? People are going to feel discomfort. They're going to be sick at some point or feel that way anyways to discourage them from eating. If their face may be all off. This is a solution?
It can be among the most personally psychologically punishing things to endure is to yo-yo diet, right? Is to drop 40 pounds and put on 25 and then put on 30 more and then drop 30 pounds, right? It's fucking psychologically debilitating for a lot of people.
Right.
It's a form of punishment that I don't know. It doesn't really exist in other forms in this culture right now. So I think that a lot of people are willing to take a lot of bad side effects if it means that they can continue basically their lifestyle,
But it's also
and also
not-
just take a drug to not look as fat.
It's not wanting to have to think about food, which is what I was saying last week. Like, it's a whole thing that people don't have time and energy for, to get the food and make the food and eat the food. If you're just never hungry, easy.
Yeah.
Right. But that is a misalignment of priorities, right? Like, we should be way more interested in the most important
We should
thing.
work less.
Sure.
We should have preventative health. We should do a lot more things differently.
You've been listening to Cast Iron Brains, a podcast with Bob and Abe. Find the show on Facebook or Twitter. Head on over to brainiron.com or castironbrains.com for a show note, which will have relevant linkage to all of the things that we discussed today, or at least most of them. I try to remember to include everything that matters, but I'm sure I don't always. The opening and closing themes of the show were composed by Mark Gillig. Head over to tetramermusic.com, where you can hear their rock and roll music. By them, I mean also Mark's bandmate Jerry, whose birthday it is today.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Jerry, but not today because he's not hearing it.
Happy belated birthday, Jerry. And also happy belated birthday to my old man, who got older over the weekend as well.
So old.
We're all getting old. Abe, I didn't check the new releases this week. Did you make it to the movies this week?
I did. That Ant-Man is out. I haven't seen it. I'm watching it this week, but that was out this past week.
Can't wait for Ant-Man and the Quantumania, or whatever the fuck that is.
It's probably going to be the lowest rated on Rotten Tomatoes among all these goofy little Marvel movies. Like, it's running neck and neck with Eternals in the Rotten score, and it'll probably be below it probably by this week. But I'm going to see that another time. Last week I went to go see Marlowe with Liam Neeson.
Marlowe.
It is not
familiar with that one.
For the best, because it is an atrocious movie. Just like very bad. I mean, this is 24% on Rotten Tomatoes. The audience did not care for it either. You know, like sometimes the critics are going to poo-poo a movie, but the audience is into it. Ant-Man is kind of like that. Marlowe, universally disliked. It's like set in the 1930s. It's supposed to be some sort of noir kind of type, but it is clunky from beginning to end. There's nothing in it that works, just bad. Don't go see this movie. I usually say movies are okay or whatever, but do not see it, not even if it's streaming, even if you're like in a holding cell.
That's too bad. It's the character, the Philip Marlowe character is Raymond Chandler creation. Like, he's had successful outings before. He's a relevant figure in the noir genre.
I don't know if it was Liam Neeson.
Not so much this time.
Or the writing. There was a lot of parts where you just kind of laughed at it. It's just very not good. But I did go but I watched this weekend at home an old movie just to kind of get the taste out of my mouth after that movie. I watched Deliverance, which is a movie from like 50 years ago.
Great movie.
Years ago, I was on this river in Georgia, and they're like, "Hey, this place is known as the place where they filmed Deliverance." I'm like, "What the fuck is that?" I never heard of it.
You weren't way down yonder on the Chattahoochee, where it gets hotter than a hoochie coochie. Were you, Abe?
Well, way down yonder on the Chattahoochee, it gets hotter than a hoochie coochie.
But this river...
That's you're canceled now.
This river is the Chattooga River, but like in the movie, it's like some made-up thing. Anyways, that was a better movie than Marlowe. The one part that didn't make sense to me, maybe things were different in 1972, but for those who have seen it, you know, these four friends from some city slickers from Atlanta go up to bumfuck wherever to go on a canoe trip, just a bad idea. They get split off, and two of them...
Even though they're white, still not a great idea. If Deliverance got remade today, it would feature
West Virginia, man, it's bad.
It would feature some folks from the Biffler, probably. Like, that would be the crew that went up.
You know what? It could work that way. That'd be kind of funny. But it is weird at the beginning how they were very cavalier with the locals. It's like, you know, got a bad vibe by this bunch, you know? Like, maybe don't be such a dick to them. But anyways, early on in the movie, these two two of the four characters, they get they have an interaction with somebody. One of them like eventually rapes one of them, right, under the threat of killing them. It was very weird. But after one of the other characters comes and kills the guy, right? Like, all right, that's enough raping. And so he kills him. And now they're worried, oh, my God, what are we going to do? We killed it, and no one's going to believe us, or we have to come up with some sort of cockamamie scam to hide the body. And I'm thinking, really? You can't explain this? Like, you guys all have jobs? These fucking yokels don't have any standing.
because then he would have to admit he would have gay sex.
He would have to talk to the policeman about how the redneck stuck his
you can't.
his Peter up his.
It's not worth it. You gotta.
No, don't
it.
mention that. See, yes, you need to clean up the story, like like those inclusive minds people. You gotta clean up what happened a little. I get that, but they took way too many risks because now if you're hiding a body and they find it, like. Now,
I mean, the plot of I Know What You Did Last Summer has the same plot hole where they hit a guy and he says, no one's going to believe I was driving. Like, everyone else is drunk.
Right.
It's like...
At least...
Yeah, they might.
Yeah.
You guys dead and now you're all dead.
Right, but if we're going to eliminate all, like, poorly conceived cover-ups or like attempts to straighten the narrative out of cinema history, we're not going to be left with very many movies.
No good movies.
And this is with a 50 years heads up that I'm making under the pressure of time. Yes, I can imagine them getting carried away. But like the one of the characters who was like he was so troubled by what was happening. Like this guy was fucking raping your friend. Look what I mean. Who cares if he died? Like why are you so like bothered by that? Like he gets in the water and he dies. I don't know what happened to him, but like it wasn't clear if somebody actually shot him because it was a little like, are these people just paranoid now? They think there are people out there sniping at them.
Yeah, I can't answer the details. It's been at least a decade since I've last seen Deliverance. Probably.
I watched most recently. I watched it with you, but yeah, it was probably over 10 years ago.
But no, it's a good movie. It's great seeing so many of these people so young, like the Burt Reynolds, very young.
It's a bummer.
It's crazy.
It doesn't make you sad.
Yeah,
it makes
John
me
Voight,
sad.
so young.
All these people
Great
looked
movie.
so much better before.
Also, it's the source of one of the most ridiculous jokes that I've ever attempted to pull off. Where I took the dueling banjos scene.
So good.
From that movie, which is, of course, that weird-looking redneck fellow with his banjo playing with one of your City Slicker friends. Yeah, they do that. It's a fucking great scene.
It's the best thing you've ever done.
And I, for some reason that I can't even remember the genesis of it, but I replaced the faces of most of the people in that video with people in the band Tetramer, which is funny that we bring this up on Jerry's birthday. But like Jerry and Mark and their old and their drummer and I think their previous bassist or something feature in it.
Good.
My face pops in. Anyway, it was a literally like hours upon hours, like 6 or 8 hours.
It doesn't even look good. It looks awful.
Of work in a shitty Microsoft movie editor on
perfect.
Like 3 laptops ago. And it took me all goddamn day, and it's among the best things that I've ever done. And it is the fact of how much time and effort it took for so stupid a payoff that makes it that good.
But that's why
that is my ideal joke is immense, unthinkable effort for the dumbest possible joke. What did we watch this week?
We watched that show. The show that Julia said to watch.
There's a show from 2019 called Years and Years. It's on HBO Max. It
Very
was
British.
A joint release with the BBC or one of those BBC channels, I think.
Very British.
And it features, what's her name?
Emma.
Emma Thompson.
Okay.
As a sort of awful Trumpy sort of character,
but not quite.
An outsider who's going to say the bad word and tries to insert herself into British politics.
The show centers around a family.
Okay,
right. The show centers around a family which has all of the. So they've got interracial marriages, they've got homosexuals, they've got single disabled moms. They hit every single one of the imaginable identity groups within this extended family of like 4 or 5 siblings, and
including a very sweet old lady who's just,
Yeah.
right. And the conceit of the show is that the world is this crazy now. How fucking crazy is it going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years? And so what we do is in the middle of episode 1, we jump 5 years, and then we spend the next couple of episodes looking at what they imagine the world is going to look like 5 years from now, and then presumably we're going to jump again, and eventually we'll get like 15 years out. It's a fine show. It's a little bit silly.
it's very weird.
But it's only like 6 or 7 episodes, I think. So
How many
we'll
years did they
finish
cover
that.
in these 6 or 7
don't know.
episodes?
I think it's 15 years, yeah.
Oh, so you guys have not finished it yet. You're halfway through?
No,
No,
we're
we
only
watched
2
2
episodes in.
episodes.
Yeah.
We also watched, what did we watch? Anything?
No, we didn't really watch much else because we got a PlayStation 5.
What?
Yeah, we didn't get one.
We didn't exactly get one.
We're fostering.
We're fostering
a PlayStation.
We're fostering
5.
a PlayStation 5. My dad had bought one and then sort
Left it in the stupidest place.
Yeah, he doesn't need it now, so we're taking care of it for a little while. Is the long story short, and an extremely long story short, but we're taking care of the PlayStation 5 now. I've been playing this Spider-Man game that came out a couple years ago. I ordered the...
Bob played it for like 6 hours on Sunday.
Yeah, I had a very lazy Sunday just playing Spider-Man. It was great. And then I also ordered the transphobic Harry Potter game that came out this past week.
Oh, yeah.
Which something that we didn't touch on, but there's a Hogwarts Legacy is the name of this game that's dropped for PC and the next generation systems, the PS5 and the Xbox, whatever the fuck, and will be coming to Nintendo Switch, I think, sometime this summer. And there's been a whole lot of angst about the existence of the game and whether or not to cover the game in gaming media or
But
in
it's
mainstream media.
We don't need to talk about it.
And it sold like $1 billion. It's going to sell. It will sell in its first year something like 20 million copies and do something
Wow.
like $1.5 billion in gross revenue.
Nerd.
Not
We're
to
just all nerds.
not to dwell on it, but was the initial pushback something new in the game or just the author?
No, of course not.
just that she'll
J.K.
get money
Rowling
from it.
has
Okay.
no impact whatsoever on this game any longer. She didn't have any input on the writing or the story. This was, in fact, there's a token trans character even in the game because of course there is. But that didn't stop the folks who insist that J.K. Rowling is the literally genocide heir. Like I keep saying that word because that's the word these fucking maniacs use to describe very normal people who have questions about the gender ideology movement over the last 10 years or so. Like they just call them genocide heirs.
Diary that I have, the question of the day diary.
Yeah.
The question today is, what word did you overuse today? And I couldn't think of one, but I didn't write down. Bob's going to overuse a lot of words tonight, but he'll find out tomorrow which words he overused.
Yeah.
Because you do that a lot.
I have actually thought about including a what is the word of the podcast feature in the podcast, because when I go back and edit it, I always find out what the word of the podcast is.
It's really annoying to be listening to.
I don't know. Sometimes you have to say the
you
word.
are listening to yourself, so you're not annoyed by it. I'm annoyed.
I
And
can
the
assure
listener
you
is annoyed.
That when I say like obfuscation 4 times in a night, I am also annoyed by it.
Right.
It just happens to be
Okay.
that word that
The
is
thing
top
you
of
have
mind.
to, when you find yourself doing that, just stop talking.
Yeah, we wouldn't have this at all if that was the case. So
We would.
anyway, the point is, people were super mad about this fucking game. You would think, therefore, that it would not sell 1 billion fucking copies. But of course, it is going to sell 1 billion fucking copies. And not because people who play the game are fucking transphobes, but because the center will actually hold to some extent if you just ignore the fucking maniacs on one side or the other.
Right.
It is fine to play a video game that says Harry Potter on it, you weirdos. We
are
also, of
doing
course, watched The Last of Us.
Oh, yeah.
Last night.
Mm-hmm.
A
Spoilers.
cliffhanger. What is that about?
Spoilers here. Be careful.
I know. Don't cliffhang me. Got a lot to think about this week.
He's 100% not going to be dead. And I don't know this for a fact. As Bill Maher says, I just know it to be true. Yeah. I don't know it for a fact. But there's no way that on the heels of Game of Thrones being the success that it was, where they kill Ned Stark at the end of season 1, right, that the next big prestige drama that sort of really hits for a lot of people
also has Pedro Pascal in it.
Is also going to kill their main character at the end of season 1.
At least
the girl.
Yeah, at least
I don't believe it.
At least Game of Thrones, there was an ensemble cast. I mean, the focus was very heavily towards the Starks and Ned Stark and whatever, right? So it was still a big. I was very shocked by that, and really nothing else after that in Game of Thrones. Even like the Red Wedding. It's like if you're gonna kill the main guy, like everything else is also possible. Like you killed his kid or whatever. Of course, that's not going to be a big thing. But
also, it's just bad storytelling if now you want me to care about this relatively poorly drawn kid. Like I get it. Like Ellie is an important character. We're supposed to be charmed by her and like her, but we don't really know what the fuck's going on with her at this point. And it would be weird to demand of us that we transfer all of our caring to this girl now after having spent the previous number of hours hanging out with the Pedro Pascal character.
Okay, but how triggered were you when Joel found his brother and said, "I came to save you," when his brother was clearly just fucking fine?
Yeah, that was a joke. That was enjoyable.
Was that also not exactly your speech at Chris's wedding?
I don't know. I didn't connect the two things.
Oh, I did.
No.
I haven't thought about my speech at my brother's wedding or read it in a very long time.
My whole life I've been worried about Chris and making sure Chris is okay, and Chris is always fine. And there he was going, I gotta go find my brother and save my brother. And his brother's like, "Oh, hey, I live on this resort. Right. How are you?"
Although, I mean,
I'm always been partial to be emotionally manipulated by brother storylines. More so now, it's father-son storylines. Like, you fucking piece of shit Disney movie, you do father-son stuff, you're gonna ruin me for 20 minutes or so. They don't. Yeah, they don't really do it, but. It's funny that as the various relationships in my life become more like, obviously I grew up with my brother my entire life. That was the most important relationship in my life for an extremely long time. So any brother stuff would always fucking get to me. But now, because I'm Calvin and Katie's father, I'm much more susceptible to the father-child relationship
stuff, though,
manipulation.
Who gives a shit?
Yeah, wife stories don't bother me too much.
Although, it's weird. I don't know if it's a numbers game when you have like a million siblings. None of the sibling stuff does anything for me. It's like, whatever. If there's a radio silence from one of them, I'll figure out the other one. Like, whatever happened to that guy? Like, he's in Wyoming. Fuck that guy. Let's move on.
No. I thought it was a good hour of TV, though. Although I didn't. Again, like, if you're gonna have a stupid death for a main character, like, I will be disappointed.
The stupid part of that is he would know you don't take that impalement object out. You leave it in.
Yeah. What was that about? Like,
he would know that.
Yeah, he should have known that. Also,
he does.
Either way, I didn't like the way it ended, because either you kill off one of the two main characters. I mean, you can maybe do some other thing in the next episode by filling in what happened with the girl Ellie at camp, or wherever the hell she came from, to kind of give some more heft to her character, right? So you can care about her a little more. But either the guy's dead, and that's a weird way to end an episode, or he survives an implausible scenario. I mean, he got stabbed. He pulls the shank out. He's bleeding out. They're nowhere near anything. Like, where the hell?
Right. He's not going to be able to get a blood transfusion anytime soon.
So how do you survive that? 14-year-old's going to drag this big old dude around?
Well, she has a horse.
You got to get him on the horse,
that's the thing.
There's nothing harder than to lift a seemingly dead body, from what I hear.
From what I hear. I'm no expert, Dave. Always quick to qualify what he's got
Secondhand
personal real-life experience.
That's what they're telling me, yes. But no, it was enjoyable. Although, this was the first episode in the bunch where I said, you know what? I'm not a binge person, but I would rather have been able just to move on to the next episode this time.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting.
So I agree with you, except that it does look like they're doing a flashback episode next week.
Not 2 weeks.
If you watch the...
So it's going to be 2 weeks before we find out what happened to him?
Right, but that's what I mean. Like, it would only be immensely frustrating to watch this next episode knowing...
No, but...
Okay, so now we got to watch this fucking story from 10 years ago to find out... like, no, fuck you. I'm skipping this episode. We're going to the next one.
That's true. Yeah. It's like, I'll circle back to this, because you can plug that in anytime, right? Why do it need to be the next episode? But yeah, it sounds like he's probably not dead, but it's just going to... I want to see how... They better not jump time. I want to see how she goes from him falling over and going somewhere to like find medicine or whatever.
I will say I was not at all surprised. I'm not going to say like I knew for certain that they were going to kill him, but when he goes from like that big emotional speech, 60% or whatever into the episode, right? Very good performance. No, not trying to downgrade it at all.
Her accent slipped.
But then the next morning he shows up and it's like, I was just kidding. I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. That sort of thing. You deserve a choice. And then they go out and they're all there just happy-go-lucky, having a good time, like father-daughter stuff, just making jokes and having quips and showing her how to do cool stunts with the gun and all that fun stuff, like happy father-daughter day. Like, oh yeah, he's definitely getting fucking shanked or something at some point before this episode is over. That's just how these stories work.
Yeah.
And I was not surprised in that way to see it end
if not,
the way that it did.
If not today, he's going to die, right? I mean, like, it's old.
Well, they're all going to die.
No, but
they all die eventually.
But he specifically seems to be like he led a purposeless life after his kid died, and he just kind of been killing people, I guess, for money or whatever.
Right, and it's the old cliche rule about as soon as a character tells the audience what a person wants, then they're going to take it away from him. So he's like, someday I want to have a ranch with a bunch of sheep. Right. Or actually, you know what? I want to be a professional singer. Right. Say, okay, this guy's going to die.
None of that's going to happen, yes.
Right. Anyway, you got anything else for us tonight, Abe?
Nope.
Well, I guess that's all we've got for tonight then, and we will talk to you next time.
Later.
Episode, but that's why when I was making that blanket for Julia, I knew you would appreciate it because of the amount. I was making a blanket. It's so hard to explain.
It's very easy to explain. There was a commercial for a mall.
A fucking 2-minute long radio ad in the 90s.
And it is unfindable in its full form on the internet. And the form of it that you can find after trawling Reddit and various weird SoundClouds.
It's only on one SoundCloud.
Is nearly uninterpretable. Like it's very difficult to work out.
It's a sort of we didn't start the fire like a rapid fire, lots of words really quickly. And they're all names of stores at a mall.
Okay.
Right.
And it has a catchy little ditty in the middle as the chorus. And
Lori wanted to put the lyrics of that song on a blanket.
Nice.
And in order to figure it out, like you have to listen to this shitty SoundCloud recording of a 30-year-old ad 1,000 times to try to interpret each and every syllable, and then to try to match that up with stores that might have existed at that time.
Yeah.
A very, very silly thing to try to do.
But I knew Bob would appreciate it because of the amount of effort and time it would take for the stupidest thing. It's a blanket with words. Right. It doesn't mean anything. It's the same as that video.
Anyway, yeah. Deliverance is good.
Yeah.
I like that movie.
squeal, squeal.